Hello friends, it's a very interesting time wherein the entire country is in a political mode, discussing about the pros and cons of electing a new government or re-electing the incumbent government. Obviously the Modi government has come out with a report card of its own, showcasing the kind of transformation, the achievement that it's done in the last 10 years. It is not just that the achievements of the last 10 years are brought in, but more importantly, the crisis situation that prevailed in the year 2014 has been brought out very vividly through an official document called the White Paper. So which means the year 2014 was a year of crisis, the country was in a doldrums, the country had gone into one of the fragile 5 countries across the world. It was known to be a not so interesting destination for the investors worldwide, and the country was going downhill. That being the case, from then, how did they stall the rot? How did they clean up the mess? How did they ensure in the last 10 years transformation happened? This is broadly the gist of the white paper. It's a 59-page document, a very brief document, so to speak. India is known to have 2 versions in anything and everything that you do. One is the Sankshipta version, one is the Vistara version. Take the case of Ramayana. It runs into thousands and thousands and thousands of shlokas. At the same time, you have a Eka Shloki Ramayana. In one shloka, you are able to give the key important milestones of Ramayana and therefore cover the entire thing. Adau Rama Tapovanadi Gamanam Hatva Mrigam Kanchanam Vaidehi Haranam Jatayu Maranam Sugriva Sambhashanam Vali Nigrahanam Samudra Taranam Lankapuri Dahanam Paschad Ravana Kumbhakarna Hananam Etadhi Ramayanam. This in a very small verse, a single verse, tells you the entire gist of what Ramayana is all about. Of course, you can go into details, you should go into details at some point in time. Likewise, this white paper is a 59-page document, a very brief document consisting of an annexure which further gives you a tabular format of the difference of the transformation that's happened in the last 10 years. In the next few minutes, let me take you through few aspects. One obviously is how the mismanagement of the economy happened by the UPA. That's a key aspect, and a couple of examples to showcase how the transformation has happened, and most importantly, what does that mean for you? There's a transformation that's happened, but it's of no use to me as a common man, then it's irrelevant in a way. So we will try to put across what it means to you as a common man, to your family, to the society at large. Shweta Patra, the white paper, is available on the Government of India website. You should be able to go through that for a better understanding of what the transformation that's happened. First, mismanagement of the economy. The thing that really directly touches the common man is the rate of inflation. The UPA economy started off on a very good note. An excellent background work done by the Vajpayee government earlier, excellent worldwide economic conditions, and you didn't have anything more to ask for. Unfortunately, what had happened is there was a huge mismanagement of the economy. Let me start with the first thing, the rate of inflation. The rate of inflation went up to the extent that it was on a trot for 20 months in the double digits. Let me repeat, on a trot for 20 months in double digit. That is the kind of a mismanagement of the economy, especially with respect to inflation, that the Congress did, that the UPA government did. On an average, in the 10 years of the UPA government, they had about 8.2% as the headline inflation. Why is it that happened? Because a lot of money was poured in without creating the necessary infrastructure to produce the goods and services. It was a lot of money chasing few goods. Naturally, inflation is an outcome. It was a jobless growth, lot of money on the one hand and no goods and services on the other hand. Therefore, there was inflation. Who did it bite? It impacted the common man, the poor, the most. Why? The poor people spend a large amount of their money on the basic necessities. And if the basic necessities are shooting through the roof, naturally it's going to impact their pocket. It's going to burn their pockets. This is what the first mismanagement of the economy through high inflation rate that the UPA government did. You can see the charts on your screen. You get to see the kind of a shooting up of the inflation rate that's happened during the Congress time. Second aspect, very interesting aspect, is that of the NPA during the UPA time. I mean, instead of calling it a UPA, it would have been better if we call it a NPA Sarkar. The Congress was an NPA Sarkar. Why? Why do we call it a NPA Sarkar? Chart on the screen shows you very well the kind of a zooming up of the NPAs in the public sector banks. Take a few data for instance. Vajpayee ji in the year 2004, after he lost the elections, by the time the power was handed over, the gross NPA was about 7%. But when he had taken charge, it was about 16%. Imagine Vajpayee ji reducing the gross NPAs by almost half, from 16% to almost 7.5-8%. Comes the UPA government, becomes absolutely careless in terms of dealing with the money, with the public money, which is your and our money, gave loans to each and every person that they were a part of, which is called as crony capitalism, or as Prime Minister Modi puts it, phone banking. Someone calls from the finance ministry, someone calls from the PMO, someone calls from the NAC headed by Madam Sonia Gandhi. The bankers are forced to give loans, knowing very well that the loans will never come back. That turns out to be an NPA. By the time the UPA handed over power in the year 2014, the gross NPAs had shot up to 12%. But there's a catch. The 12% was an underreported figure. The real figure was close to about 17 to 18%, worse than what it was when Vajpayee ji inherited in the year 97-98. What does this mean? What does this NPA shooting up mean? It only means two things: that there was a huge political interference to loot the public money. Okay, how does that impact a common man? Why should that bother you, bother me, or bother someone on the road? It should bother for the simple reason, as I described now. The bank, especially the public sector banks, are funded by the government of India, and the government of India in turn gets money from the taxpayers' money, pay people like you and I who make the taxes, who pay the taxes, and through that money it goes. So what happens? The banks have lent out, let's say they have lent out about a lakh crore of rupees, knowing very well that money will never come back. Now that 1 lakh crore money is not there, but the depositors has kept the money needs to be returned to them. The banks don't have the money, they look up to the government of India for recapitalization. The banks look up to the government of India, and the government of India had to shell out money. But where does the government get the money from? From the taxpayers' money. Which means to say, the taxpayers' money through the government of India, through the banks, is reaching the pockets of those crooks, of those luteras. Which means to say, indirectly, our hard-earned money, which we are happily giving it to the government as a tax so that the overall society benefits, was going into the pockets of those crony capitalists. That was the big pain, mismanagement of the economy brought in by the UPA government, or should I say, the NPA government. Okay, the NPA government had about 17-18%, including the underreported ones, once everything was brought out into the open. And this was said by no person less than Raghuram Rajan, who said that between the year 2006 and 2008, massive amount of loans that originated the big ticket NPAs later on. So what did the Modi government do in the last 10 years? While it was a mismanagement by the UPA government in terms of controlling NPAs, the Modi government ensured that as we speak today, the NPAs, the gross NPAs, are just about 2.3%. You heard it right, 2.3%. From a high of about 17 to 18% to less than 2.3% is a massive achievement. It only means one thing, that the government is professionally running the banking sector, mandating the banks to ensure that the money is gotten back whosoever it could be. No more phone bankings. So the money recovery happened. Over 10 lakh crore rupees have been recovered by the banks in terms of the NPAs, which were earlier NPAs, now recovered by the banks. The net NPA is less than 1%. This makes the banking sector strong. This makes the banking sector much more stable for two reasons. Why? Number one, now your hard-earned money is going to those luteras through the NPA mode. Point number one. Point number two, if the money was already stuck with the defaulters, the bank would have lesser amount of money to give it to genuine borrowers. It could be an individual borrower, it could be a small time SME, it can be a startup, it can be an industry. Now that money is released for genuine borrowers, genuine users. So on the one hand, you are saving money for the country, you are making sure that the money is taken back from the defaulters, and third, most importantly, you, the genuine borrower, gets to borrow money from the bank. So this is how, the second example of how economy was mismanaged by the NPA government while it was set right by the Modi government. An interesting aspect that we should definitely look at is the fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit broadly means the total amount of loans that the government has to do in order to take care of its day-to-day activities as well as the new investment activities. A revenue deficit means even to run your day-to-day activities you are borrowing. If it's a fiscal deficit, it's a combination of revenue deficit, or if there is no revenue deficit, then it's completely into your capex formation. While taking loan is very important so that you start building the infrastructure, you start investing in good future of the society, what's more important is the kind of an effect that it has on the economy. You need to budget it, you need to ensure that you are well within the limits of a sustainable debt. If you look at the chart in front of you, you will be shocked to see the kind of a shooting up of the fiscal deficit. At some point in time it reached close to up to 8%. There is a catch here. You might say in the year 2008 and 9 it is not 8%, it is 6.1%. Okay, there you have a point. 6.1% is one figure, 7.9, that is closer to 8, is the second number. Which number do we take? 6.1 is the fiscal deficit without including bonds. What the government did very smartly, you had a very smart finance minister, you had an economist running the government, they used all their intelligence in these kinds of smartness. A fiscal deficit is something that you openly tell the world that you have taken these many loans. But while issuing bonds and not showing it in your books, it meant to say there was a loan, but you are not showing it as a fiscal deficit. Which means to say the 6.1 as a figure is the underreported fiscal deficit figure. And the real figure is 7.9%. Imagine 7.9%. Just to contrast it, during the COVID times, which is a once in a century Mahamari, so to speak, the Indian government under Prime Minister Modi just about crossed 9% of fiscal deficit. The point I'm trying to make is an exceptional situation demanding an exceptional answer versus a day-to-day situation wherein you are frittering away all your hard-earned goodwill from the previous government and the society at large. This kind of a fiscal deficit, what does that entail? It means it's crowding out of the borrowers. Just to give an example in a layman's term, let's say 100 rupees is what the government intends to borrow. There are, let's say, about 500 rupees is the total amount available with the banking sector to lend. 500 minus 100 is about 400 that's available for the outside world. If the government, instead of borrowing 100, borrows, let's say, 200 rupees, which means to say the corporate world, the individuals, the households, their borrowing capacity or the availability reduces by 100 rupees, which means to say the government is crowding out. There's a technical term, it's called crowding out the other borrowers. Which means to say, because of the government's inefficiency, you had to pay a price. We had to pay a price. The common man had to pay a price. It is not just about the fiscal deficit. Remember, I spoke also of the revenue deficit. If you take revenue deficit as a percentage of GDP, it shot up through the roof during the same 2008-2009 as an example. 4.6 revenue deficit without oil bonds, 6.3 with including the oil bonds. Revenue deficit is a smaller subset of the fiscal deficit, and you see for a day-to-day running you get to sort of take loans. It speaks of the mismanagement that you have done. Okay, at some point in time you might still give them a long rope and say, okay, the borrowing is done, an increased amount of borrowing, but what if they have put that in capital investment? What they have invested in good infrastructure, in which case it's going to do good to the society, right? Let's look at the figures once again. When Vajpayee ji handed over, once again I go back to the year 2004, the capital expenditure as a percentage of the total government expenditure was 31%. Meaning, if the government of India spent about 100 rupees, 31 rupees went into capital expenditure, like roads, the Golden Quadrilateral. That was a big visionary dream that connected the entire of the India's major metros. At the same time, the government of India under Vajpayee ji did not forget the village. Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, which connected each and every village to the nearest town, to the nearest highway. So this ensured that about 31% of the government's expenditure was in capex. Now you come to the UPA government, the NPA Sarkar that mismanaged the economy. Not only did they mismanage the banking sector, not only did they borrow more, they did not also invest in what was required in infrastructure. You'll be shocked to hear from a high of 31%, it fell down to about 16%. 31 to 16 is almost 50% drop. And no wonder you're not able to build roads, you're not able to build airports, ports, waterways, ports. warehouses, which means to say these are the things that actually generate more income. There is a technical term in economics that's called as capex multiplier, capital expenditure multiplier, which means if you put 100 rupees for a capital expenditure like a road, for an airport, for a warehouse, for a big educational institution, for a medical college, in a period of 5 years, that becomes about 700 rupees. That's the kind of an income generation that it does. But if you were to invest 100 rupees in a revenue expenditure, saying that I'll waive off a particular loan, therefore take rupees 100, that 100 end of 5 years will still remain to be 100, or actually speaking it's about 98 rupees. What did Vajpayee government do? 31%. The UPA government brought it down to 16%, and now in the last 10 years, Prime Minister Modi ensured that we put focus back on the capital expenditure. It's now back to 28%. Notwithstanding the fact that we had 2 tough years of COVID, we should not forget that had that not been the case, probably would have been in the same range or better than what Vajpayee ji had given it on a platter to the next government. And our intention is very clear as a government. We intend to focus very, very high on the capital expenditure part. In the year 2014, probably about 1.5 to 2 lakh crore rupees would have been invested in capital expenditure. The last budget, the latest budget, put about 11.1 lakh crore into capital expenditure. This is the kind of a difference in terms of managing an economy by the Modi government and mismanaging an economy by the Manmohan Singh government. Okay, this was broadly the context setting in terms of giving few examples, be it the rate of inflation, be it the fiscal deficit, be it the NPAs, and be it the capital expenditure, how the UPA Sarkar, the NPA Sarkar mismanaged the economy. In the next few minutes, I'll give you a few instances of the kind of transformation that's happened so drastically. It's like then versus now, how bad it was then versus how transformed it has become today. It's fairly important because you and I have gone through that, we understand it. The first generation of voters today, the people who are about 18, 20 years old, who need to understand that this was the kind of a tough situation that our country was in just 10 years ago. I'll give you a few instances. The GDP per capita in terms of PPP was about $3,889. Today as we are talking, it's crossed 6,000 US dollars per capita, which means today it's more than 1.5 times increase in terms of PPP mode for an Indian citizen. Take the case of government capital expenditure. We are speaking of the capital expenditure. What was it then versus what is it now? As a percent of the GDP, the capital expenditure has increased 2x, 2 times. It was about 1.7 during the UPA era, at the last of UPA, and as on the last financial year, we are at 3.2%, almost double. Let's take the case of foreign direct investment, FDI. Why does the FDI matter to us? FDI matters for the simple reason that it's the outside world that strongly believes in your capability to have a India growth story, that the country is growing, that the country is becoming stronger, more prosperous, and capable of absorbing more and more capital to further grow, and that's in their interest to put money and get profits. The FDI cumulatively in the last 10 years of the 10 years of the UPA rule was about 305 billion US dollars. And in the 10 years of the Modi government, we had about close to 600 billion US dollars. Once again, almost 2 times more. The story of India growing under a stable leadership is gaining ground. People happy about it. People acknowledge it. People entertain that idea. The most important thing, one is the foreign direct investment, about what the world thinks of us, of our future, of the promise that we hold. On the other hand, what matters is, what is it that the common man on the road, the poorest of the poor man on the road faces, experiences. The philosophy of BJP, as you should be aware, is called Antyodaya. The poorest of the poor man, if he were to be pushed up, then the average automatically moves up. That's been the strategy of the Prime Minister, be it the poorest of the poor being focused or the aspirational districts, which means the most backward districts focused so that your average moves up and further you are able to generate better progress for the society as a whole. If you take the case of multi-dimensional poverty, the reduction is about 60%. 29.2% of the population at the last of UPA time was suffering from multidimensional poverty, while it is today just about 11.3%. A massive, massive reduction. And how did this happen? This happened because of 2-3 reasons. One, absolutely non-corrupt and a focused delivery system. an efficiently focused delivery system. Gone are the days when the then Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi spoke of how a rupee sent from Delhi would become just about 15 paisa by the time it reached the villages. Today, a rupee sent from Delhi is a rupee received in a village. DBT, direct benefit transfer. No middleman, no leakage, no delay. Directly a click of a button in Delhi, your mobile rings saying that you have received X amount of money as an SMS. That is the reason, apart from the fact that there is a very focused approach, the ease of living approach, as the Prime Minister calls it, building houses, Awas Yojana, making sure that there are toilets, making sure that there is water, making sure that there is electricity, making sure that there is access to good health care, you name it, the poorest of the poor are getting it. No wonder the multidimensional poverty has drastically decreased, and in absolute amount, 25 crore people have moved out of absolute poverty in the multidimensional manner in the last 10 years. Another interesting and a much required transformational reform that's happened is that on the indirect tax rates. Direct tax rates, you're aware broadly that earlier you would probably for about 1.5 to 2 lakh rupees, your tax liability would start. But today, as on today, even at 7.5 lakh rupee, you don't still have to pay a single rupee tax. That's on the one part on the direct tax. What's more important is the indirect taxes. Why? Because indirect taxes pinches the poor more than the rich. Therefore, your focus on ensuring that the indirect taxes are rationalized is very, very, very important. Pre-GST, that was the era when you had multiplicity of taxes, taxes on taxes. And that led, on an average of a basket of goods, about 15%, 15% as the average indirect tax. With the GST kicking in, merging a lot of indirect taxes, making sure that there is a rationalization. Today, the effective indirect tax rate via GST is just 12.2%, which means to say a household that would spend earlier 100 rupees would pay 15 rupees tax. Today they pay only 12 rupees, which is they're saving 3% outright. Not only are they saving on their direct taxes, they're also saving on the indirect tax. At the same time, imagine, look at the kind of a transformation that's happened because of the GST. The first year of the GST saw 0.9 lakh crore, that is about 90,000 crore rupees each on a monthly average collection of GST. As we are talking today, the last financial year speaks of a 1.7 lakh crore on an average, monthly average of GST collection. The best part is the rate has decreased, the base has increased, therefore the collection amount has increased. The states are better off, the center is better off, the poorest of the poor are getting their needy, the necessity and the much required support from the government due to this very reason. For those of you who believe that one international, an international index which is a standard one, having a lot of heft in it, like the Harvard Economic Complexity Index. It ranked India at about 52 in the year 2011, and in the year 2021, 10 years down the line, it is ranked as 42. The lesser the number, the better it is. So we have moved up 10 ranks, which means to say it speaks of the productive capability of a country to produce more and to export as well. The last segment, I'll quickly run through a couple of social welfare schemes, the kind of an impact. In the last few minutes, let me take you through the social welfare impact that the Modi government has been able to do. If you look at your screens, you get to see the kind of an impact. LPG connections, it used to be about 14.5 crore people, while today it's about 31.5 crore people. It's almost doubled. You're talking of electrification status. It used to be about 85% of the villages were electrified. Now today the entire country is electrified 100%. You're talking of rural places having the availability of electricity. It used to be about 12 hours a day during the UPA era, and today it's about 20.6 hours. Which means to say almost for the better part of the day, the rural places are getting electricity as well. You're talking of the tap connection, Nal Se Jal. It used to be about 3.2 crore houses that were having the tap connections. Today it's about 13.8 crore households. So these are the broad touch points that I have looked at. A detailed look at the 59 pages white paper along with the annexure 2 will give you a very, very interesting revelation of sorts that tell you what kind of a bad situation that we were in. And it is for this very reason that the government of India says very clearly that we did not want to further put the people into lack of hope or despair in the year 2014, but worked for the next 10 years, stabilized the economy. Now with a lot of pride we can tell the world India is a strong country, the 5th largest economy in the world, about to touch the 3rd largest economy position in the next 2 to 3 years time, and with a lot of stability, with a lot of inherent strength. Therefore, looking back and telling what kind of a situation that we were in is good thing for the voters, for the citizens, especially the first time voters. Make sure that you go through this. Make sure that your children who are voting for the first time have an understanding of this and get them to vote in a much more meaningful manner. Namaste.